short-lived. Trump and his loyalists immediately went on a disinfo campaign that he had won election. Tons of lawsuits and recounts were filed. Yesterday, Trump got to work to seek revenge and cause roadblocks for Biden. First, Trump's GSA official refused to sign a letter releasing funds for Biden's transition team. Then Trump fired Defense Secretary Esper via Twitter and continued this today with more firings, nearly decapitating the top positions of Pentagon. Trump continues to clearly state he won't leave while installing his loyalists in key positions. And we still have 70 more days left. To discuss this and more, I have constitutional scholar and political scientist Miranda Yaver with me. Hi, Miranda. How are you?
Doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. First, congratulations to all of us on the very, very necessary Biden-Harris win. That definitely was great news. But then, unfortunately, right after that, it went into a complete disinfo campaign run by Trump and his loyalists to discredit the whole election system and the results of the election. And with that, they started immediately filing lawsuits in all the states. Well, not all the states, but around 5 states. And they have requested recounts. So let's start with the lawsuits. What is going on and what do you think?
So, as far as I'm concerned, the lawsuits over voting irregularities are not so much a legal strategy, but rather a media one to really fuel this perception that there's ongoing uncertainty in the outcomes when, in fact, we know from systematic social science research that voter fraud does not exist in any remotely wide scale to any wide scale degree. In fact, a systematic analysis of over 1 billion votes cast found only, I believe, 35 credible cases of voter fraud. And so this is something where you might find 1 or 2 cases here or there, but this is not something where it's going to tip the scales in a state where Vice President Biden is winning by 10,000 or 40,000 votes. So one of the things that the president's campaign has been doing is trying to challenge votes that have come in, ballots that have arrived after Election Day, even because they're saying that only ballots arriving on or before Election Day should be counted. Now, this is problematic because voters were told that their ballots could arrive, up until the Friday after the election. And so as long as they were postmarked, they should be able to be counted as long as they were postmarked on or before Election Day. But those late arriving ballots are one area where the president's campaign has been litigating. But we just found out today that an Erie, Pennsylvania postal worker who had alleged that they had seen instances of irregularities in ballots just recanted their testimony. So already the lawsuits are sort of fizzling out, and I think it's really just been an effort to maintain enthusiasm among the base and to sow uncertainty with respect to looking at the outcome.
Okay, well, that's very reassuring on the lawsuit front. And what's interesting with all of this is that you have Trump and all his loyalists running this campaign. I mean, everything between that they won the election to they are winning the election to election fraud. I mean, they have literally 7 different disinformation campaigns. But they're not challenging North Carolina. They're not challenging Florida. They're not requesting recounts in other states where Trump won. And then you had Mitch McConnell, who, comes out and as one of the top people in the Republican Party who, pushes this same thought. but yet no, he's not challenging his own win. Lindsey Graham isn't challenging his win. So it's basically only the states that Biden won. That's where they think there's election fraud. And as a
Yeah.
result, we're, kind of attacking the fundamentals of
Yeah,
our
so we can
fair
see,
and
and
free election.
yeah, so we can see the inconsistency in this strategy also in how the Trump campaign was handling late arriving, or handling the counting of ballots throughout this election. Because you would see in Michigan they were saying stop the count, and in Arizona they were going count the votes. And so, they don't really have a consistent message with respect to the counting or cessation of counting of votes, and nor it's all very consistent with whether they seem to be doing better or worse in that state. And likewise, they only seem to be concerned about voter fraud in areas where Democrats did well or better than expected.
And what is the case in Pennsylvania as far as when the ballots arrive? Because I don't see them having an issue in North Carolina where, as long as ballots were postmarked by Election Day, they have until November 12th to arrive. So, but in Pennsylvania, they have this issue. So what's happening with that case? Because I know the Supreme Court temporarily stepped in.
Yeah, so initially it had been the case that votes cast in Pennsylvania had to arrive on Election Day, and then the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, I believe, I might have the particulars of this a little bit wrong, but basically they said that because they were going to be, moving more toward mail voting because of the pandemic, they were going to allow ballots that were postmarked by Election Day to be counted. So it was that they had made an adjustment to essentially how late ballots could arrive and be counted. And that was something that the state Republican Party strongly objected to, in addition to which they had objected to being able to count ballots, count mail-in ballots before Election Day, which was why we knew that it was going to be the case that Biden was going to look like he was behind in the beginning and then look like he had pulled ahead once mail ballots were eventually counted.
Oh, and again, like I said, in North Carolina, they have no issue with, ballots arriving late as long as they're postmarked, because in North Carolina, Trump is clearly ahead. So that's not a worry to him. What about what happened with the lawsuits on the post office front? Because I know that another move by the Trump campaign was to sabotage the post office, preventing ballots from being delivered. And I know back and forth they were in court, and the judge, I think Sullivan, had ordered the post office to deliver, I believe, 150,000 ballots. I might be wrong about that. And DeJoy completely disregarded him. And then the next day, I know that he went back to court. The post office went back to court, and they got chastised for not, following through with the judge's orders. Whatever happened with that, and what happened with those ballots?
To be honest, I'm not sure. I had a lot of other stuff to follow, but I don't actually think that it was a very consequential number of ballots that were picked up in the sweeps of post offices. But that was not a lawsuit that I've been following closely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hopefully they'll let those ballots get counted, considering they were sabotaged and withheld, and the post office refused to deliver them.
Yeah,
Okay,
I thought that there was a question about whether we're looking toward another Bush v. Gore. One of the challenges is that one of the challenges to the legitimacy of the court right now is that President Trump explicitly said that he wanted to have a 9-member court should if and when the election was challenged in court, which essentially meant that he was going to be able to pick one of his own pick one of the judges in his own election. So I think that even though I don't think that the particular issues that are going on right now are going to rise to the severity of another Bush v. Gore, I don't think that this is nearly as close. I mean, mathematically, it's not as close an election. And there's just not nearly as much merit to the Trump campaign's claims. So I just don't think it's going to rise to that. If something like that were to happen, if the Supreme Court were to rule in favor of the Trump campaign, and I don't think it will, there would be a significant cost to the legitimacy of the court, because it would look like Trump chose the person who was ruling in his favor, handing him another term against the will of the public. So there would be a lot of problems if that happened, but I don't think that it will.
And Zach Lee made a very good point that, I mean, Trump is the one who disparaged the post office. He told his supporters, of course, his supporters went and voted in person. And that same day election results. And meanwhile, the Democrats, mailed in the votes, which got counted later. And that's why you saw Biden start rising, his numbers start rising through the mail-in votes. Plus, making up the difference with Trump's same-day votes. So that's a very good point. What do you think of, speaking of Supreme Court, do you by any chance have any updates on the ACA fight today, ACA decision today? I know that was up before the Supreme Court.
Yeah, so the Supreme Court heard oral arguments on the Affordable Care Act today, and they gave every signal possible that they intend to uphold the Affordable Care Act.
Okay, that's good news.
Yeah.
Okay, so then with that, moving on Sunday, Trump's GSA official refused to sign, which is very customary and has always been done, the letter releasing funds to the Biden transition team in order for them to start moving forward. I'm not clear if they're receiving intelligence briefings like they should be, and basically Trump is taking all the steps to not to acknowledge that Biden has won, including sabotage, for him not to have difficulties throwing roadblocks at him, for him to have difficulties moving forward during this transition time. What can be done about that? I mean,
yeah, so this is very unprecedented terrain in that we have a presidential candidate the incumbent president who is not conceding, and who is not acknowledging that he lost the election. And meanwhile, we have not just the president and vice president saying this. Vice President Pence just said that he looked forward to continuing to serve as the head of the Senate, which obviously is not going to. Which is not going to be the case, considering that he's supposed to lose his job on January 20th. He's not supposed to be presiding over the Senate past January. And recently, Mike Pompeo talked about preparing for a second Trump administration, so it's very disturbing to see that we have not just the president himself, who we know it can sometimes be divorced from reality, but the entire administration really seeming to fail to outright reject the legitimacy of the election results in which the president lost. And so, and I saw that there was a question about whether it's more of it's a coup or more like just grandstanding. And right now, I think it's hard to tell. But I think that the more that we see this grandstanding, the less legitimate people are going to view the next president. And that is going to be really corrosive to an already very polarized society. And so there's the immediate challenge, which is helping facilitate the Vice President Biden as he in his transition, and then there's the longer term problems of the legitimacy with which people are going to view the next president, given Trump and his cabinet members' refusal to acknowledge the results.
Yes, and then the world, Pompeo stood on stage and, basically said he looks forward to serving for the transition into a second administration. That automatically raised eyebrows across basically the world, Europe, the world, anyone who believes in democracy. I've been monitoring Russian media coverage of this, and I mean, they literally, this is unprecedented, where they are using the language from Republicans in order to delegitimize our election, to delegitimize our democracy. I mean, usually they put out these conspiracies or disinformation and kind of funnel it through. Here, they are using the words of Lindsey Graham, of McConnell, of Trump, and they are delegitimizing our election process. They are mocking it. They're showing, why it doesn't work, and basically on the flip side saying that we are trying to commit a coup when Trump, clearly won, which is not the case. I mean, people voted. Everyone went out in the middle of a pandemic. We had unprecedented numbers of people voting, and Biden was clearly not even by a small amount. He was clearly chosen as the next president of the United States. And with that, you have leaders like, Putin, who refuses to acknowledge that Biden is the next elected president. He hasn't reached out to him. Yesterday, he made a statement that he's not reaching out to him. And that sets up, a very dangerous situation going forward, even when Biden takes office, because I mean, Russia, regardless of anything, is still, they have influence in the world, and we definitely are going to have to figure out how, what to do with them. But when you have the Russian president, claiming he's not legitimizing it, the whole situation is disturbing. People in Europe are disturbed. I mean, and it's horrible that that European leaders reached out to congratulate Biden, and yet President Xi from China, Putin, and the Republican Party refused to acknowledge this. I mean, it's something we've never had in the history of this country.
And something that I think is worth emphasizing is that even if Trump steps aside and eventually facilitates a peaceful transfer of power, he leaves when he's supposed to, there's still the erosion of democratic norms that is taking place here, because we're still having one of the major political parties in the United States essentially saying, we'll accept the results if we like them. And we're seeing this in the Senate too, where Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue recently called for the resignation of the Republican Georgia Secretary of State, basically having absolutely no allegations to present of voter fraud, but saying, alleging irregularities, but not having anything specific, but basically just not liking that they have to go to runoff elections